Good morning, everybody. We are going to talk about literary theory. I've kind of alluded to this already a little bit this week, but literary theory is one of the ways that we will analyze different texts that we read, beyond just reading them and talking about the books. So I will give you a quiz on literary theory next week where you'll have to identify all the lenses, but you can use notes from this lecture for that. So, I'm starting out. What is literary theory? It's the way people read texts. So, if you think about it in terms of like putting lenses on, putting on a pair of glasses, and that's the lens with which you view the literature. And I'm going to give you 9 different lenses, and when you view the literature through that lens, you'll pick up on certain things. There's no right way to look at literature. All schools of thought think that they're the right way. So different theories think, yep, this is the best way to look at literature. We should always look at it through this lens. And in using lenses, you'll start to view texts maybe a little differently than if you're just reading them for surface value. Where does critical theory come from? In the 20th century, theories began to emerge. Different theories, scholars would come up with different theories, and no theory is based in factual knowledge. Someone created it, it's arguable. So the great thing about critical theories is that you can argue them, and that sometimes refines our thinking. Some theories are created in opposition or response to another theory. So some of them will butt heads really well in discussion and will help us, again, to hone and refine our theories about a book. So using theories, how will we use them? If we're too rigid, like this says there, rigid application of a theory can spoil a book. If we say, I only look at this book through this lens, no other lens fits, that can be problematic. So we will try to use multiple theories for every book that we read. And when I say theories, I want you to think theories or lenses. Same thing. I will use those two words interchangeably. It's an open-ended process. Some of you who are very black and white, the lenses will challenge you because it's not a science. It's open-ended. We try to find different things in the books to fit or enhance a theory. First theory that we will do, so if you're numbering these, I would number this one number 1, is reader response. When you do reader response, this is probably what you've done mostly through your educational experience. It's where you're making a connection between you and the experiences in the text. Where you say, yep, I relate to the main character because we've both gone through the same thing, or we've both experienced this place or this setting. In reader response, literature has no objective meaning. You bring your thoughts to it, you bring your experiences to it, and that's how you evaluate the book. That's what we do all through English 10. You're responding to it, you're making life connections to it, and that's how you understand or interpret the book. Some examples of reader response. Your teachers have asked you to do this probably way back into 5th grade. Connect the literature to your life. Connect the literature to current events. Discuss how the literature makes you feel, or compare the literature to the way you view the world. We've asked you to do those things probably many times. In English 10, I know we do that. You write about it, you blog about it, you do different things to connect it to your life. Okay, number 2, the second lens or the second theory that I'm going to give to you, and you've done some with this one, is the formalist criticism or formalist lens. When you use the formalist lens, you're scientifically dissecting the text. So that's when your teachers ask you, what's the setting? Who's the protagonist? What is the plot line? What's the theme from this story? How does imagery play a part? Where do you see foreshadowing? You do a lot of that in AEL. formalists, picking up on all of those different elements that then come together and make a good text. Common assumptions of formalist criticism: if you're using the formalist lens, you believe that literature is a special mode of language and it's different from everyday language. Poetry is a special mode of language and it's different from everyday language. Literary work is independent of the author and the historical context during which it was written. In AEL, we read Shakespeare because we really think that that still has themes that are applicable to our everyday life. It doesn't have to only be read during the Renaissance. We can read it today, and we still find themes, literary elements that work in today's context. Okay, number 3 is archetypal criticism. So, archetypes are universal symbols that appear in literature, in myths, in dreams, in oral tradition, in songs. When I tell you to use the archetypal lens, you are looking for universal symbols that you would see across the board in different books, poems, etc. Some examples of archetypes that we will look for are water. A lot of times flowing water is symbolic. It's an archetype. The sun usually means something positive. It means something is centered. Certain colors or numbers are definitely archetypes. When we see red, a lot of times in poetry, English poetry, red symbolizes danger or blood or death. Circles. Circles are used as archetypes all the time in literature. The serpent, you see serpents a lot of times in poetry especially. The garden, where life springs out of, that's pretty symbolic. Trees, the desert, where things are maybe dry and not giving life anymore. Some archetypal characters. The hero, the mother, or Earth Mother, the soulmate, the trickster, the damsel in distress. We have archetypal characters in movies all the time, and that's probably where you are most familiar with it. But a lot of times in books we have that archetypal hero or the archetypal damsel in distress. So looking for those archetypes will help you then flesh out perhaps a thesis about a book. More archetypes that we see in plot: light versus darkness, good versus evil, the journey or the quest, where the character's on a journey to find himself or to earn certain qualities. That's an example of an archetype. Common assumptions of archetypal criticism. You believe that certain images will recur in text, which you have seen before. You see that a lot in AEL. I start prepping you for archetypal criticism. Certain characters or character types will recur in texts with an archetype lens, and then certain motifs and patterns also will recur in texts. All right. The next lens, let's see where we're at here for time. The cultural or post-colonial criticism. This examines how different religions, ethnicity, class identifications, and political beliefs affect how texts are created and interpreted. So when we look at cultural criticism or post-colonial criticism, you're really saying, how does ethnicity affect this text? How does social class affect this text? How does politics or political beliefs affects this text? It also really examines what does it mean to be part of or excluded from a particular group. That enhances your understanding of the text. So when you look at post-colonial, a lot of times that's where we'll look at like Native American literature. What does it mean to be excluded from the majority? We'll use the post-colonial lens in looking at that text. What is colonialism? It's the political and economic control over a dependent territory. Colonialism still happens today, where we maybe have our military present in a certain territory, and we are, as the next bullet point says, seeking to shape the identities of the colonized people. Maybe we're running an election. Maybe we are telling them how they need to, run their society, run their country. Colonialism has happened as long as history has been around, where one group is taking over another group and shaping their identity. Colonialism uses a process called othering, so the colonized are seen as different and lesser than the colonizers. So this group of people is less civilized. We're going to bring our good technology to them, we think, and make them more civilized because they need us. That's the belief behind colonialism. Common assumptions. When we use this lens, it's important to look at the relationship between the dominant and the non-dominant cultures. So if you're using the post-colonial lens, who's dominant and who's not? And then many times literature written by colonized people attempts to articulate empowered identities and reclaim culture. So when you are reading a Native American text that's written by a Native American, they are often trying to articulate their identity and reclaim some of their culture. And we will read a book that does a really nice job of that, where you'll get to kind of see maybe some different aspects of that culture. All right, I'm going to stop momentarily here.